I'll hand over to Steve to welcome and introduce the session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marnie. Good morning, everyone. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country throughout Australia, and their continuing connection to land, water, and community. Paying our respects to the traditional owners, their cultures, and also their elders, past and present. I see a lot of familiar faces on the screen at the moment, and good morning to people I know, but those that don't know me, my name is Steve Bunnell. I'm the Vice Chair at Landcare New South Wales. As part of that is also the Chair of the Nominations Committee. We've got some of my fellow directors are on the call at the moment. I can see Lynn Thompson as Secretary. We've got Liz Riley. I can see Kathy Kelly as Treasurer, and there's certainly some Landcare New South Wales staff. Good morning, Jody. Good morning, Marnie. Good morning, Kim, Aman, and Kimberly as well. So yeah, it's as I say, a lot of familiar faces. I mentioned my role at New South Wales being Chair of the Nominations Committee, and part of that role is the recruitment. We have I'll let Randall go into more depth, but we've been, most of the recruitment nominations committees on here anyway. We've got we're tasked with finding replacement directors and keeping that process open and broad and attracting the best people. So without rabbiting on about that, I will pass over to Randall. Welcome Randall back to us. Most people would be familiar. He's been a friend of Landcare New South Wales for a decade, probably. And yeah, I'll just pass on to Randall now to begin the presentation. Did we want to go on to questions? Sorry, I will mention that if you could put questions through the chat so that we can compile those, and we've also got a record of them. And yep, there you go. Kim has just put a message in the chat there now. So thank you. I'll just pass on to Randall. Thank you. Welcome, Randall.
Thanks, Steve. Good morning, everyone. Great to see you all across New South Wales. And thank you for joining this webinar on the governance checkup process. This is the last stop along the way to the special general meeting, which will be held on the 3rd of June. And we've gone through a very extensive consultation process. This is the final step before we ask 75% of the members of Landcare New South Wales or more to approve some constitutional changes. These are refinements of the 2022 reforms, and they're very much based on your views as expressed over the last 12 months. I think I started this project in July last year, so I guess we're at 10 months, Steve. And by the way, it's 12 years now that I've been with Landcare. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to share a slide deck here, and I hope you find this helpful. All right. Well, look, I just want, before we get into the nuts and bolts of constitutional change, I want to just sort of take us up 10,000 feet in a helicopter so that we've got a good view of exactly what it is we're trying to do with Landcare New South Wales. Now, so the issue is, what was the problem Landcare New South Wales was formed to solve? And many of you know that the current Landcare organization sits upon the foundations of a government program which was discontinued in 2004. So what was the problem you were formed to solve? Well, Landcare New South Wales was established to restore funding, to replace organizational support, and reconnect Landcarers with one another across the state following the end of the decade of Landcare funding in 2004. part of the reason why, aside from, absolutely loving Landcare, part of the reason why I've been involved so long is because from a professional perspective, this is a very challenging project. This idea of building a membership-based association on the remnants of a government program. Now, so how did you solve the problem? Well, you solve the problem by forming a membership-based association, establishing a legal entity to advocate for funding, build an organizational support structure, and facilitate communications amongst yourselves. But why is a membership-based association needed? And I can't stress often enough that it's important we all understand and support the notion of a membership-based association. Pardon me. A membership-based association is essential because it provides a legal entity to conduct business and manage funds. Not-for-profit associations can only be owned by their members under law. That ensures their effective control and that the benefits remain within the community they serve. Associations support a democratic governance system where people vote and deliberate and where majority rules, because it aligns with the principles of our Australian liberal democratic society. And we give all members a voice in decision-making, and I think that Landcare New South Wales has been very effective at listening. Well, now, what are the benefits of a paid membership? And can I just say, Landcare was somewhat late in explaining both the need for a paid membership regime and the benefits of one. It really wanted to prove its worth before it went out and asked groups to put their hands in their pockets. And so they did that. And, they're very proud that there have been 3 rounds of Landcare Enabling Program funding. And it was only until the second round was approved around 2018, 2019, that Landcare launched a membership program. And unfortunately, it was marketed almost solely as an insurance program, which was wrong to do, because there are many benefits of a paid membership. And the first is that unite people around your common purpose. And as part of this project, I did a strategic plan with the board and some additional people, and they came up with a really great purpose statement. And it's a membership value proposition is not just a marketing tool, it's a promise to your members that you're committed to achieving the mission success. Number 2, it instills pride. So when you can say, I'm a Landcare New South Wales member, hopefully that affiliation will help you feel more effective at the local level, because your efforts are not seen in isolation, but they're part of a statewide movement, and they're amplified across the state. As a group, Landcare is tremendously impactful. A paid membership also gives stability to not-for-profit organizations. Revenues from membership should be generated to cover some of the core expenses of operating a not-for-profit. That is, the cost of running the board and the hiring of a CEO. Now, the current membership fees go nowhere near to covering those amounts, but it makes a contribution. And that's particularly important for organizations that, like Landcare, that receive a large percentage of their funding from the government, because if the public funding is withdrawn, the organization can then continue to operate and to advocate for a return of that funding. Now, Landcare New South Wales is particularly vulnerable in this respect because it relies upon the government for 89% of its revenue. So it's important that not-for-profits, as I say, have their own money, at least some money, so that you can continue to operate should the government withdraw the funding. And may I remind you, this organization was born because the government withdrew funding in 2004. That is, the federal government withdrew the decade of Landcare funding in 2004. And that is why Landcare New South Wales was established. And boy, oh boy, it was very difficult because it had no money when it started to do that. If at least you have a little bit of your own money and you can keep the lights on, then you can always rev up the engine and start to advocate again. And then finally, and this really sits at the core of the value of Landcare New South Wales. Landcare New South Wales is there to advocate on Macquarie Street for local groups. Full stop, end of story. That is its purpose. Now, political influence is a numbers game, and it's measured in the number of paid memberships an organization has at any given time. This has never been properly explained, that actually membership is the key to your strength. And unfortunately, we've seen a situation where groups have not understood the value and the importance of kicking in a few dollars for a membership and have sought to try to minimize that expense by piggybacking on other groups or district networks or larger bodies, anything to avoid being a member. Well, that's counterproductive, folks. What you really need is a strong and large membership statewide. That is the key to your political influence. That is the key to your future funding. So thank you for indulging that. I really feel that these messages are the important ones that should be out there to every Landcare on the ground. And I know that all of you are the conduits to those people. Well, now, before we get into the detailed changes, I simply want to flag at the very beginning, there are no proposed constitutional changes to membership. I know that we spent about a half a day talking about membership and various options and alternatives we might have had when we did the governance workshop in November here in Sydney. But essentially, and this is the proof that Landcare listens. Basically, what was decided was that, you know what, people don't feel entirely comfortable with introducing change to membership at the moment. We also discovered along the way that the existing membership arrangements were not implemented properly. And so we said, oh, okay, look, people are not comfortable with changes to the membership system right now, so we won't make them. So if anyone ever doubts whether or not Landcare New South Wales listens, this is the proof of the pudding. There are no changes to membership in this document or in the Constitution you're being asked to approve in a couple of weeks. Pardon me. Now, I mentioned at the outset that this round of reforms seeks to refine and clarify the substantial reforms which were undertaken in 2022. So now, so as not to confuse you, I just want to kind of remind you of what those changes were so that when I talk about how they're now changing, you'll understand. First of all, Landcare New South Wales was incorporated as a company limited by guarantee under the Federal Corporations Act. This was a requirement of the New South Wales government. They said that any organization that wished to receive more than $20 million in funding would need to incorporate itself as a company limited by guarantee rather than an incorporated association. The reason for that is the companies limited by guarantee, as I mentioned, are regulated federally. The directors, therefore, have legal duties that they must fulfill as directors, or they can be held personally liable for any misconduct in the company. This lifts the discipline necessary to govern an organization like Landcare New South Wales, and it provides the government assurance that the directors are going to take their duties seriously and discharge them effectively. Now, when you change your incorporation from the state level to the federal level, you have to have a new constitution. And look, it just was cleaner and easier to start from scratch and write from a blank page, and that's what we did. And one of the key features of that is we installed a board of directors whose purpose was to govern the organization. Previously, the various permutations of leadership of Landcare New South Wales were entirely representative. I represent this part of the state. I represent that part of the state. All of a sudden, we've now got a governance board. The governance board has a responsibility, each and every director, to think about the entire state, not just where they come from, but the entire state. And that is a requirement under the Corporations Act. So this was a very significant change. Now, look, we had been accustomed to sending people from various parts of the state to the Landcare New South Wales board table. And so we didn't want to move away from that entirely. So we developed 6 board electoral zones, which were basically formed by putting 2 of the Landcare New South Wales regions together across the state to create the 6 zones. And from those 6 zones were elected 6 what we called ordinary directors. These were Landcares that were elected by their fellow members in their geographical board electoral zone. And in addition to that, we allowed for the appointment of 4 independent directors. These are people who bring skills that weren't able to be found amongst the membership of Landcare New South Wales. So we've got, thank goodness, I'm going to single you out. Kathy Kelly is a chartered accountant and a really, really wonderful businesswoman. She's also a committed environmentalist and runs the Malone Institute. But Kathy comes as an independent director because an organization like Landcare New South Wales really needs to have people who have financial nous, who really understand accounting and the law. And we're fortunate to have Kathy join. Liz Riley is another independent director. She comes from the viticulture business. But she brings so many great governance skills. She's a terrific director. So you are blessed by having both a great group of members who have been elected by their colleagues, as well as independent directors who have come in and added those additional skills. And pardon me if I haven't mentioned all of the independent directors. I just wanted to use a couple of examples. Now, one of the really critical things and one of the most visible things that you will have seen as people on the ground across the state is the creation of 11 regional regions for Landcare New South Wales. And they were created to align with the boundaries of local land services, because local land services is the primary funding channel for Landcare New South Wales in New South Wales. Now, we also created 11 regional bodies to govern those regional areas. Now, there were 6 in existence, and those 6 still stand out as the model to follow. Some of these regional bodies are far more developed than the state peak body itself. They have better systems. They've been in business longer. They predate the formation of Landcare New South Wales. But what we needed to do was to ensure that the other 5 regions would have the beginnings of a regional structure. And the reason why we did that is because when I began the consultation process last July, one of the first people or groups of people I spoke to were government policymakers, quite senior government policymakers, or perhaps I should say decision makers. These are the people who decide how much and if Landcare is funded. They said to me in no uncertain terms, Randall, we love the regional model. We want to do more with Landcare, and we want to do it through the regional bodies. So please keep these regional bodies. nurture the new ones, encourage them to grow. And if they do, we will have a very, very effective partnership between the community and government going forward on the ground. The other thing, of course, that the regions demonstrate is that Landcare New South Wales is able to deliver a program from one side of the state to the other, from Tweeds Heads and Ballina down to Albury-Wodonga, from the far western reaches of New South Wales where it butts up against the outback to the beach. And that is critically important because your funder is the government of New South Wales, and it needs to distribute taxpayers' money equitably across the entire population and geography of the state. Pardon me. We also established an advisory council as the members' voice to the Landcare New South Wales Board. So I want you to think about it like this. We have the Landcare New South Wales Board here. They're responsible for governing the organization, that is, running the business, making sure every dollar is accounted for, laws are obeyed, and the organization is run according to its constitution. Then we have over here the State Advisory Council. This is where the members have a conversation with the board. This is a form of dialogue at the State Advisory Council, because at that meeting, you have the officers of Landcare New South Wales, and you have the chairs of the 11 regional bodies and their support people. This is where the board says, we have taken decision X. These are the reasons why we've taken it. Please help us communicate that message to our members. And on this side, members from the regional bodies will say, our members are looking for support in this particular area. Can you please advocate for this support, this change in regulation, this change in the way of doing business? And so it's at the State Advisory Council where you get this dialogue back and forth between the directors and the members. Okay, well now, we'll get on to where we are today. So a lot of you will have seen this roadmap. I just want to point out that here we are at the member webinar in May, and that we're working towards the special general meeting on the 3rd of June. The reason why we have taken such care to consult with people at every bend in this road is because in order to change the constitution of a company limited by guarantee, 75% of the members present must approve the change. So this is why we've been so diligent in making sure that we work with people, that we bring people along on every single step, and I'm quite satisfied that we have. So today, our objective is to review the propositions for change that are going to be reflected in the constitutional amendments in June. And look, there's only 9 of them. I'm going to deal with them in 3 groups. The first deals with the recruitment and nomination of directors. The second deals with the board, its composition and its size. And the last section deals with the terms and conditions under which directors work. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to speak to the propositions under the first heading, and then I'm going to open it up for discussion and questions. Then I'm going to go through the second one, and so forth. And then at the end, I'm going to begin by answering these questions which were submitted in advance. I have 3 of those, and then we'll open it up to discussion from the floor. So now, let me just begin. All right. So under this heading of recruitment and nomination of directors, we have 3 propositions for change. The first is to allow the nominations committee to search statewide for candidates to nominate to the Landcare New South Wales Board. Look, this is simply a realization that there are lots of talented people across the state, but if they don't live in an electoral zone where an election is being held, they're lost to us. So what this does, this eliminates the board electoral zones. It allows the nominations committee to say, we're going to take the most talented candidates wherever we can find them. Now, the other thing, though, I will say on this point is that because Landcare New South Wales is a state-based body, and because the government is very interested in full coverage of the state, it's going to be really important that Landcare New South Wales always has a range of people from around the state. So don't think for a second that your board is going to come from a place like Sydney. It's far more likely to come from a place like, I don't know, Armidale or some other place in the state than it would be the city. We'll always need to have a good spread geographically. Okay, the second is to add 2 state advisory council members to the nominations committee. Now, as you'll see as we work through these changes, the nominations committee job has been enlarged and been made more important. But it's very important as a principle of good governance that the members select the directors. You do not want a situation where the board is selecting its own members. That happens at Landcare Australia Limited, where we call it a self-sustaining board. When you're setting up a not-for-profit organization according to the principles of good governance, then the members must elect the directors. So in order to ensure that there's an absolute majority of member representatives on the nominations committee, we are adding 2 members of the State Advisory Council. All right. And lastly, we're going to broaden the board skills matrix to include perspectives, that is, points of view, ways of thinking, and geographic location as search criteria for board candidates. You don't want people who all think the same. You don't want people who all come from the same kind of place. And again, I just want to say, this is another reassurance that we will always have people from across the state on the board of Landcare New South Wales. All right. Now, I'll just pause there and take any comments or questions on these 3. Just put your hand up using the React icon at the bottom. You'll see there's a white hand there, or a black hand, or a orange hand. Yes, Bev. Just unmute yourself.
Just finding the button. Thanks, Randall. Just for clarity, how many people will be on the NOMS committee?
I believe, now, Steve, can you help me here? How many do you have currently?
We have 5 currently.
Yeah, so there's going to be 7. And what we've done is we've kept it as an odd number, Bev, so that the group cannot be deadlocked. The other reason for the 7 is I call this a recruitment and nominations committee. Now, it's just called a nominations committee in the Constitution, but it's a recruitment and nominations committee, which means that they have quite a lot of work to do. So having 7 on the committee is actually a pretty good idea. You know, when you think of Steve as the chair of the nominations committee, Steve has about 5 other hats that he wears. And so he needs help. So having 7 on that committee is a good number. Anyone else?
Randall, it's Kim here. There's just a question in the chat around whether or not candidates outside of New South Wales will be considered.
Pardon me. Theoretically, an independent director could be brought in from, well, no, there's only going to be one single class of director, and they're all independent. There's nothing to prevent someone from outside of the boundaries of New South Wales from being appointed. We used to control this through the board electoral zones. We said that people must reside within that board electoral zone. The same thing did not apply to independent directors. Now we have a single class of directors and we have not limited it. However, let's apply some common sense, folks. If somebody lives across the fence in Albury-Wodonga and they're effectively participating fully in Landcare New South Wales, terrific. But this is a New South Wales organization. You're going to be dealing with the New South Wales government. It's in your interest to have New South Welsh people on your board. But like I say, we've always made allowances for that property across the fence. So for example, if you're a local Landcare group and you sit on the boundary between 2 regions, you always have the ability to choose which regional body you will affiliate with. And we did that to recognize reality that, the way that people relate in regional areas is not always determined exactly by the borderline. So, what we've always tried to do with Landcare is to maintain common sense. And yes, so it is technically possible for someone from outside of New South Wales to be on your board. And, like I say, if they're across the fence, that's terrific. But for the main, you're going to have New South Welsh people as your directors. Anyone else? Okay. Well, I'll move on.
Randall, me again.
Oh, okay, Bev.
You were saying that the noms committee is going to be the members voting for the board, not the board voting for the board. How does that work when you've got 5 potentially from the board and 2 from the SAC?
Okay. So first of all, the nominations committee nominate, they do not elect. They do appoint some, okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting tied up in the language a little bit. The nominations committee nominates, but ultimately the members in the annual general meeting will elect the nominated members. Now, the power of the committee comes in through a regulation which says that no one may stand for office unless they are vetted first by the nominations committee. So that gives this committee quite a lot of power. So you cannot be elected by the members unless you're nominated by this committee, Bev. So now with the composition of the 7, we have 3 board representatives and 4 member representatives. So therefore, the member representatives on the nominations committee will always have the majority vote in terms of who to nominate. Okay. I'll carry on here. Okay. All right. Now, board composition and size. So I've already, it's a bit duplicative, folks, but we just want to be really thorough here with you, okay? So as I mentioned before, we are creating a single class of director on the Landcare New South Wales board. We're eliminating that distinction between ordinary directors and independent directors. So I think that that's been made clear. I just want to mention one further thing. By creating a single class of director, we will now have consistent terms and tenure on the board. So previously, ordinary directors were limited to 2 3-year terms. The reason why we did that was in order to ensure sufficient rotation between those board electoral zones, because an election would only be held every so many years in a particular place. So that's why we shortened the tenure to 6 years to allow that rotation to happen. However, the independent directors were always given 3 3-year terms, which meant that there was a misalignment. Now, by moving to a single class of director, everyone will be able to serve 3 3-year terms, and that then makes it easier to manage the renewal of the board through the rotation of the people who hold office. And you have a board that will be between 7 and 10, but let's say you have 9, then you would have 3 retiring in any given year, 3 being elected in every given year, and then it just rolls on with the 3-year terms, and it makes a very orderly process of renewal. The other thing that we have done is we have specifically added Landcare experience to the skills and perspectives matrix. And by Landcare experience, we mean natural resource management or Landcare experience that's gained through volunteering or paid employment with an NRM organization or a Landcare organization, or through work on boards and committees, government commissions, that kind of thing. Now, again, I just want to reinforce the role of common sense here. You are an NRM organization. You are a Landcare organization. You will always need to have a really, really strong contingent of experts in NRM and Landcare. There is no question about that. Some people were concerned that somehow there might be these people from outer space who come and join the board without this experience. It's simply not possible. You need this experience. We have simply now made this explicitly clear in the Constitution to avoid any doubt at all. Now, we're allowing for a variable number of directors to sit at the Landcare New South Wales board table. And we have said that the minimum is 7 and the maximum is 10. This allows the board to scale up and scale down depending upon its needs at a particular time. Right now, Landcare New South Wales is functioning without a chief executive officer. That means a lot of the workload falls to the board. Therefore, it would be in the board's interest to appoint a couple more directors for this period of time to see it through, to spread the workload. However, under other circumstances, let's say when you do have a CEO, but let's say you're going to embark upon a new project. Let's call it a digital project for Landcare. And you look around the board table and nobody really has experience in implementing a statewide digitization program. So therefore, you might go out and recruit a director who brings that particular expertise, who could help advise the board on how they should roll out that digitization program. Right. I just want to note here, let's say the day after the special general meeting, the board decides that it wants to appoint a director. It has the ability to do that. It's called filling a casual vacancy. And they can do that simply through a vote by the board. Now, the important point here is that appointment lasts exactly 12 months. And that person's directorship must be approved by the members at the next annual general meeting. So while the board has the ability to increase its size, and it can do that outside of annual general meetings with the members, it can only do that for 12 months. Because ultimately, the members own the organization. That is the principle that runs through all of the governance of Landcare New South Wales and all other not-for-profits for that matter. And it's being maintained here. Finally, in 2022, I heard from a lot of people who were passionate about ensuring that Australia's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples were represented strongly within Landcare New South Wales. After all, they were the first land carers. And so what we did in 2022 is we specifically reserved one of the board seats for an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. And, you know, big thanks to Steve and his colleagues on the nominations committee. They recruited a number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders to sit on the board. Unfortunately, none of those people have seen their terms through. And in speaking with them and with other Aboriginal people, they said, don't rush it. You can't force Aboriginal engagement. You can't, you know, just because you say you want it doesn't mean it can materialize tomorrow. Aboriginal culture, as we've been told, operates at a different rhythm. And they said, simply wait. And when it's time, it will happen. So now what we've done is we have preserved that commitment to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander engagement and participation in governance in the new constitution, to simply say that we will continue to reserve one of the 10 seats for an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, and we will welcome one when it is time. Okay, I'll stop there and take any comments or questions on these two propositions. Okay, looks like that went down. Oh no, Peter. Hi, Peter, you're on mute.
Hi, Randall. Yeah, I just had a question about that last point and whether there were, like in that same vein of the patience required and the ongoing journey of engagement with First Nations people, is the board or are the arrangements open to like other ways that representation with the same, I guess, power, for want of a better word, as board members, or for people who might, you know, who might not want to, you know, be in a minority of 1 to 9 or 1 to 10 people in a governance structure. Just wondering what the, you know, other structures that there might be to involve that representation and decision-making capability without having to be one person or 2 people.
Excellent point, Peter. And so, yes, the answer is at every single layer or level of the organization, we should be seeking and inviting Aboriginal participation. So at the local group level, if you have Aboriginal people in your area, you know, do what you can to bring them in. If, you know, you have a district network, there are some district networks that exist in the state. If that is a level where an Aboriginal person or persons might feel most comfortable to participate, bring them on board. The regional bodies, all of these different levels throughout Landcare New South Wales are open to participation by everyone. And we, I think, all want to do everything we can to invite Aboriginal people to do that. Now, the second point, though, that you made is you said, can they participate in a way equivalent to a director? The answer is answered by the law. The law says no. Only the directors hold legal authority over and responsibility for the operation of the organization. So at that level, you either are a director or you are not a director. It is not possible to have people come and just observe board meetings, because under law, they'd be considered what we call shadow directors, which means that even though they have not been properly appointed, they share in the liability faced by the board, but they would not be covered by the insurance that we provide for directors. So no, there's not any equivalent. You're either on the board or you're not. And then you've raised another important point, Peter, and I work across the entire not-for-profit sector, so I encountered this quite a lot. And that is, gosh, it's really tough to be the only one. And, you know, I've lived here now 22 years. It's taken me a long time to become exposed and familiar with Aboriginal culture, but I had a wonderful experience 2 years ago doing a roadmap for the community broadcasting sector, which is made up of 50% Indigenous broadcasters. So I had a really, wonderful opportunity to engage with Aboriginal people. And they said to me, they just kept reinforcing that, there's no Aboriginal person who can represent all Aboriginal people. We have 130 Aboriginal language groups in Australia today. Historically, it went as high as 800. And they're very, very distinct peoples. And so Aboriginal people are quite reluctant to represent Aboriginal views on a board. Now, that said, we don't think about them as representatives anymore. We think about them as people coming with cultural perspectives. So when we talk about the skills and perspectives matrix, the Aboriginal or First Nations perspective is valuable to Landcare. We would like to recruit people on that basis. And, yes, it would be great if there was more than one. There's certainly no limit to the number of Aboriginal people who can serve on the Landcare New South Wales Board. So I hope that answers your question, Peter. I see I've got one from Bev and from Kim.
I was just going to make a suggestion that maybe what we do as part of the recruiting process is offer board training, because a lot of the Aboriginal people haven't necessarily had the exposure to boards, as you were saying, and therefore they're coming into the unknown, but maybe also some NRM training or something as well, so that, because I know when I first came to Landcare New South Wales, the acronyms and stuff, I thought you were speaking a foreign language. I think there needs to be a training program, and maybe for 2 or 3 people at a time, so that they are coming on the board trained and knowledgeable about what they're dealing with. And keep stressing the representation, the perspective.
Yeah. And thanks, Bev, for that. That's really important. Training is critical. Can I just say, you don't need to have the Australian Institute of Company Directors course under your belt in order to be a director of this organization. That is complete overkill, and that would put a lot of people off. Now, when we first introduced the 2022 reforms, I did a half-day training session with directors. We've still got the slides. I'm very happy to do that again, because then they get trained not just in general governance principles, but they get trained in Landcare New South Wales governance. That's an important thing. Steve.
Just making sure I don't get a fine. Can I just add to that, Randall? It's up front and centre with the current board that we try to develop our skills, develop upon the skills base we have. So one of our directors is looking at that actual project at the moment, so that we can upskill and do offer the as part of the induction that the directors are certainly comfortable with their responsibilities and fully aware with that, but certainly always looking to upskill as best we can, naturally within the environment we work.
Great. Okay, super. Well, look, I'll move now just to the final two. All right. And here's the last two, folks. There we go. All right. I mentioned this before. So we're now extending the tenure of directors from 2 3-year terms to 3 3-year terms. However, we wanted to really specifically point out no renewal is automatic. All directors who have completed their first term and their second term are evaluated by the nominations committee. And they're evaluated in terms of their attendance and participation, but also their performance. I mean, the nominations committee has to say and answer this question: does this person's skills, are this person's skills and perspectives still required by our board? And has this person made a contribution such that we feel confident they will continue to contribute in the future? So this is not some kind of a cruise ship you get on at the beginning of 9 years and you stay on it until the end. There's actually check-ins at 3 years and at 6 years. And again, if the board doesn't need your skills or perspectives, or if you're seen not to be a strong performer, you won't be renominated. And remember, no person, existing director or prospective candidate, can be elected by the members without being nominated by the nominations committee. So that's quite clear, I think. Now, the last one is a provision. A provision is simply, we're making it possible at some point in the future, but not right now. And what we're doing is making a provision for the payment of a stipend to directors, but it is also subject to approval at the annual general meeting by the members, because the members own the organization. The members elect the directors to run the organization in between member meetings. So all the power is in the hands of the members. Now, why is this being introduced now? Let me speak first about Landcare New South Wales and then about not-for-profit organizations in Australia more generally. First of all, you will recall in 2022 that we made a provision to pay a stipend to the chair of Landcare New South Wales Board. The purpose is very specific. It is to compensate a self-employed person for their time away from their gainful employment. The other is to compensate an employer whose employee is a director and who may need to use work time to do Landcare New South Wales business instead of their employer's business. So it's simply backfilling. It's allowing the employer to say, yes, you can serve, but we can't be paying for that, so we're going to get some compensation back from Landcare New South Wales. Now, that's the very specific thing about Landcare. More generally, though, in not-for-profit organizations, the AICD has recently found that 27% of all not-for-profit directors in Australia receive some form of payment. Now, it's not large. In almost no cases is it large. These are token payments. These are payments that help reduce. They do not cover the lost income, okay? Now, the reason why not-for-profits are doing that, there are a number of them. First of all, we shouldn't just rely upon wealthy people to serve on boards. Pure and simple. Not everybody's rich. And certainly not everybody's rich in Landcare. And someone may have a really, really strong contribution to make, but they might need a little bit of help to do that. So therefore, it's an equity measure. It's a positive thing. The second reason, though, is that you're trying to access hard to find skills. I mean, I mentioned Kathy before because I'm such a fan, but oh my goodness, it is so difficult to get a professional qualified accountant to sit on boards because every board needs one. There's massive, massive competition. So a small stipend might help attract them. And then the same is true for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander directors. And I know some of them, and they're just overrun with requests because as the reconciliation movement has gained pace, and in particular, as we led up to the referendum last year, you know, organizations were doing their darndest to try to make sure that they had that Aboriginal voice at the table, but there aren't that many Aboriginal people who are qualified, who are interested, or who are affiliated with your organization. So therefore, there were, you know, money, payment is used to attract these particularly difficult to find candidates. So look, I'm just going to show, no, I won't do that. I won't do that. I'll stop here and take any comments or questions on those last two, and then I'll answer the general questions that were submitted in advance. Any questions on these last two propositions, the 3-year terms and the payments? Okay, hearing none. I'm going to now move into...
Randall, sorry to interrupt. I can see Edwina was gesturing. Wanted to give it, and Liz is ready to ask a question as well.
Well, it's more that there's stuff in the chat. If Randall can have a look at that.
Oh, I can't see the chat. So go ahead. Just ask, Liz.
Well, Larry's question was, for any of these changes, have we established how the efficiency of their adoption is to be measured and reported to the membership? And a comment from Bev, lowest socioeconomic board nominees may need help with computers and internet for online meetings.
Okay, so let me deal with Bev's first. So if you felt strongly that you wanted to appoint a director who didn't have a computer or internet access, then it is always within the power of the board to provide those things if it so chose to do so. In the Constitution, it says that directors may be compensated for the costs they incur as being a director. And if the Landcare New South Wales Board was satisfied that that person only needed the computer or the internet connection to participate in the board, then the board could make the decision to compensate that director for those out-of-pocket expenses. So it's absolutely possible. I think it's somewhat unlikely because you're looking for strong talent in governing complex organizations. These people are likely to have those basics. But like I say, if they don't, you can always make a decision to do that.
Randall, I was thinking more of probably the First Nations people. We were talking about it at the Aboriginal Steering Committee the other day, and that, you know, people would like to be involved, but just their, ability to connect is not there.
Well, I mean, you know, there is, The people on the call know more about this than me because I live in the middle of a big city. But from what I understand, internet coverage is getting better, and that where it doesn't exist, you can go to Starlink. Now, if you're talking about a Starlink connection, yeah, that's an investment. So, you know, you might want to do that, Bev. But it's up to the board, and it's possible. Now, the second one, Liz.
Was
From Larry.
Yeah, sorry, and I had missed Edwina. Sorry, Edwina. I'll let you chat to that one. For any of these changes, how have we established? I'll start again. For any of these changes, have we established how the efficiency of their adoption is to be measured and reported to the membership?
Okay, so Larry asks a good but complex question. Landcare New South Wales has not done a formal board evaluation process in its existence, to my knowledge. Maybe you've done it and haven't told me, but I don't think that would have happened. So boards should periodically evaluate their performance, Larry. And you can do that through informal means and formal means. So, you know, the first form of evaluation is for the chairman each year to have an individual conversation with each director and to identify, you know, what they want to achieve, any barriers they're experiencing in making change at the board level, et cetera, but also to communicate the chair's expectations. You know, Director X, we expect that you will participate, you'll attend all meetings. We expect that you will have read your papers. We expect that you will ask questions. And so that's the first level. The second level is having a group discussion of the board itself, where it basically allocates some time for open dialogue to talk about its performance and to reflect upon its performance. And then you can move into more formal mechanisms. So that's where you bring in an external person such as myself. I might then interview all of the directors and present a report, providing people an anonymous way of feeding in their perspectives. And then there are even more elaborate corporate evaluation tools that can be used. But again, it's a question of money and time. To answer your question specifically, Larry, what we're talking about today are the proposed constitutional changes. I'm happy to speak to the board about plans for evaluation, but I haven't had that dialogue with them. Steve, has the board had a conversation about board evaluation?
Yes, and certainly informally, the process has been conducted over the 2 years that I've been on this board, or 3 years. So certainly the chair does make contact and review performance. We're very lucky with the attendance levels on our board as we report in our annual report. They're made available to the members to view. But certainly in other areas and committees and subcommittees, there is let's say a collegiate approach to the review across the board, and a supportive view, because as you know, we're all volunteers with the corporate responsibility. So I can see Liz Riley has a hand up as well, but the actual formal process, no, but an informal formal process, yes.
Liz?
Oh, I think I just wanted to add, I think that in some ways the measure of success is a thriving, healthy and willing and able board. You know, there's definitely a level of fatigue in the small board. There's a particular suite of board members who are going over and above in the absence of a CEO. So that affects people's desire, capacity, ability to keep going in that role. So if the board keeps shrinking because that capacity is not there, that's a problem. So the measure of success for me is that we have capacity.
Excellent point, Liz. And I'd just build upon that, if I may, and to say that membership is also a measure of whether governance is functioning appropriately. First of all, there will be an absolute measure of support for the governance changes at the special general meeting, because we need 75% of all the members present to vote in favor in order for the changes to be adopted. I might remind you that in 2022, the level of support was well over 90%, or almost unanimous, I think. It was really, really, really high because we've done so much work to be in touch with the membership. Now, I don't know if there are people involved in WIRES on the call. WIRES is the Wildlife Injury Rescue Emergency Service, which operates around New South Wales. They have had 3 goes at reforming their governance and 3 failures. And they're losing members, which is unfortunate for the animals. That's an example of where governance has failed. And because, you know, we're in a democratic society, people don't have to belong. And so if you're not doing a good job, they're going to leave you. Larry.
Thank you, Randall. The question was not of a general nature. I did not ask about the general measurement of board performance. I specifically asked these specific recommendation of changes to our constitution. Have we established how the efficacy is the word I used, efficacy of their adoption going to be measured? Quite specific, not general, because general is a cop-out. I am specifically asking these specific measures you have, sorry, not you. The board has determined that specific recommendations of changes have been made. Have we established what our anticipated benefit from each of these is to be, and I would add, be reported to the membership?
Okay, fair question, fair question. So
yeah, I thought so.
Okay, Larry. So look, I would love to be able to do that. Unfortunately, it's not possible because all of these provisions interact with one another, and it would never be possible to isolate the impact of one change on its own. What we do in the field of governance, there are really talented researchers. These are academics, legal academics primarily, but there are academics who study governance, and they reach, you know, through their scholarship, they reach conclusions about what is best practice. And in Australia, we are blessed. We have 2 sources of best practice governance. One is the ACNC, the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission, and they have a series of standards, governance standards, which they expect registered charities to meet. And they recommend those standards because the ACNC has reviewed all of the academic research that has been done, and that they are confident that if not-for-profits follow these principles, that they will be well run. In addition to the ACNC, Australia is blessed again by the Australian Institute of Company Directors. The AICD issues principles for good governance within not-for-profit organizations specifically, because there are some differences between corporate governance and not-for-profit governance. And they have set out, I think there are 18 principles. Pardon me, I have terrible asthma, folks. Sorry for the cough. So Larry, what I have done, because I'm trained in these matters, what I have done is I have ensured that best practice governance is reflected in all of the changes. And the one example that I'll simply hearken back to is the principle that the members must own and control the organization. Therefore, we have a majority of member representatives on the nominations committee. And we also have the annual general meeting approving the election of those directors so that the affairs of the organization are in the control of the members. So that's just one example, but there are, I think, 20 or 30 in there that reflect best practice. In fact, that structure between the board and the State Advisory Council, that dialogue of going between the governing body and the representative body, that is out of academic research into good governance. And that has been shown time and time again in not-for-profit contexts to be the most effective way to ensure that the members remain in control of the organization, but that the members appoint the expertise and the skills and the perspectives that they need to manage a large, complex organization like Landcare New South Wales. So I hope that answers your question.
I congratulate you on your session, Randall. It was well presented, and I thank everybody for their time and consideration and the clarity that there is work being done on the governance side, but there's also some important work being done on another webinar. The next steps, can we just clarify that the information that will be shared after this webinar, please, Marnie?
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Randall, and thank you for everyone else. And we really do encourage you to attend that special general meeting, especially as members, you know, to have your voice and to partake. So please do make sure you register. There's clarification details within those registration forms and on the pages that I will share out in regards to, you know, am I eligible to vote and all of the different classifications around representing your member group if you are the appointed representative. So that will be coming out with information. So pop it in your calendar if it's not already, the 3rd of June, 8:30 to 9:30 a.m. via Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you again to Marnie and the staff and Randall. Appreciate your time, and everyone for attending and your input. Really appreciate it, and hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.